Now, are we any closer to deciding what we think about electric cars? Perhaps we are, as the UK's largest ever study into the use of low-carbon vehicles draws to a close. Drivers who took part tested more than 100 all-electric cars.
Well, data collected in the trial shows they're cheap to run and ideal for the daily commute to work. Our transport correspondent Peter Plisner is in Solihull at the headquarters of the company that managed the project. So, Peter, how did this trial go?
Well, Mary, pretty successful. Here are some of the cars involved in the trial from a variety of different manufacturers. 110 vehicles in all. Now, though the trial has finished, the data's still being processed. But here are some interesting facts that have emerged already. The average charge time during the trial was 2 to 3 hours. Now, the average cost of a charge was a staggering 30 to 80 pence, incredibly cheap. Most journeys during the trial were less than 20 minutes. Now, earlier today, we went out with one of the drivers involved in the trial. Gloomy, damp and miserable, but not even today's wet weather could dampen Craig Pullen's spirit. He's been lifted by the fact that driving an electric vehicle has been saving him a fortune.
Well, it's almost exactly the same as driving a conventional automatic vehicle, with the exception of it being fairly silent, so there's no rev noises, and it's limited to a top speed of 65 miles per hour.
The cabled project was launched more than 2 years ago in sunnier weather than today. In all, 110 vehicles have been tested, but for many of the drivers, the biggest issue has been something called range anxiety.
Factors such as the weather. If it's rainy like it is today, and I have to have the wipers and lights and heating on, then that also does have an effect on the range of the vehicle.
Craig charges his car at work and doesn't pay anything for the electricity he uses. So the big question is, how much is he saving?
Prior to using this vehicle, I had a conventionally fuelled diesel Astra, and that was costing me, in company car tax and fuel, somewhere in the region of £300 per month, and that was at last year's fuel prices. So this one saves me in excess of £300 every month.
Although the number of electric cars on the road is still pretty small, the trial that Craig has taken part in has shown that they can be affordable and are a highly practical transport solution. It's now predicted that by the year 2020, between 5 and 10% of the cars sold around the world will be electric. And increasing sales could also mean more jobs in the Midlands. The smart cars used in the trial were converted to electric in Staffordshire. Joining me here is Neil Butcher from Arup, the company that managed the trial. Now, these may be environmentally friendly, but they're still very expensive to buy.
You've got to remember that this is very early stages of development of the technology. Even now we're seeing, as more vehicles come on the market, that competition is coming in and prices are starting to reduce already. And as that moves on in the next few years, we expect prices to continue to drop.
But the expensive bit is the batteries. They do cost a lot of money, don't they?
They do, and that's going to change a little, but not that much. What we are seeing is that some manufacturers are splitting the car from the battery, so you purchase the car and then lease the battery, and that takes some of the risk of the batteries. The life of the battery may only be 4 or 5 years, but that will you can go and get a new lease for that, and it also the prices are much more similar to a conventional car. And the price of the car is the same, and the price of the lease price of the battery is very similar to the cost of petrol. And
of course, there's still range. I mean, 100 miles is as good as you'll get. A lot of these drivers complaining about this range anxiety.
Yeah, electric vehicles won't suit everybody. They are designed really for urban environments, for shorter journeys, and we've got to remember that most people only travel something like 25-30 miles a day. So for most people, for most journeys, then electric vehicles are absolutely fine.
Very briefly, are there enough charging points around?
There aren't yet, but as more and more electric cars come onto the road, then we'll be putting more and more charging points in.
Neil, many thanks. Well, the sales of these sort of things is increasing, but I have to say it's still pretty slow progress.
Thanks, Peter. It'll be interesting to see how that develops.